Welcome everybody to our wonderful webinar here this afternoon or morning or evening, depending on where you are. My name's Forrest Bullock. I'm a senior lecturer at the University of Massachusetts Amherst, and I'm super excited to host our topic of the day, Do Names Matter? Branding, Marketing, and Communicating about Geography, Spatial Sciences, and GIS. This is part of the 2021-22 webinar series here with UCGIS, and I am just very excited to see and hear our conversations and the presentations ahead. So we will go through a set of presentations from our wonderful group of presenters who I'll introduce here shortly. And then we'll have some polling and some opportunities for questions afterwards. This webinar is being recorded and will be shared on the UCGIS website after it's complete, so you can tell all your friends to watch it because it's going to be fantastic. So I am very happy to introduce our presenters here today, starting with Amy Fraser. Amy's an associate professor in geography and urban planning at Arizona State University. Dr. Fraser will be starting us off today, and she's joined by Justin Stoller, who's associate professor in the Department of Geography and Sustainable Development, the University of Miami, and Diana Tergazarian, who is a research associate at Florida International University. Dr. Fraser, Dr. Stoller, Dr. Tergazarian, I'm very much looking forward to seeing and hearing from you all, and I'm going to shift the powers, as it were, to our first presenter, and we'll get moving here.
Thank you, Forrest. Okay, my job is to not bungle this too much. Let me see if I can show the right screen. Okay, and then, all right, and I'll take the confirmation that you can all hear me and see my screen.
Looks great.
All right, thanks, Forrest. Yeah, wonderful introduction. It's great to see so many folks on familiar names and new names too. So we're going to start with just a quick presentation from me, and then from the second group on the papers that we each wrote a couple years back on this topic of renaming and names in geography. The paper that I'm going to talk on today was co-authored by Tom Weichel, who is in the Department of Geography at Oklahoma State University, but he couldn't be here today. And this paper was published in the Professional Geographer in 2017. So again, we're going to give about 10 minutes here, so pretty brief, just to kind of run through these to get up to speed. So we started our paper with this quote from Jerry Spinelli in Stargirl, and basically says, I am not my name is something I wear like a shirt. It gets worn, I outgrow it, I change it. So like many of the best research studies, this one was hatched at the Wine Bar in Stillwater, Oklahoma on a Friday night. Tom was one of my mentors, and so we met pretty frequently in my early years at Oklahoma State just to chat about, you know, all of those things that mentors and mentees chat about. And on this particular occasion, we started to talk about the name of the department at Oklahoma State. And so the geography department there had recently tried to undergo a name change, and it had been denied. So there was a bit of turf war, maybe you might call it, with the word environment. But geography also realized that we were having low major numbers. We were teaching more than just geography, and so geography wasn't necessarily reflecting what we were. We had kind of outgrown our shirt, we had outgrown our name, and it was time to change it. So that's how this project was born. And we went about, let me see if I can actually advance here. There we go. So we went through the AAG Guide to Programs, and we had the 2014-15 guide, and we identified 428 geography programs in the US and Canada at that time. And we cross-checked that against the 1990 handbook. So Tom actually had all of these in his office, which was super handy. So we cross-checked those and kind of corroborated that with some internet searches and identified 89 departments that had undergone some sort of name change between 1990 and 2014. So that's, you know, over that 25 years, that's 21% that had a name change. We created a database of those and had a research aide look up the contact information for the chairs and heads of those departments. And then we simply mailed them a survey. We asked if they weren't around during the name change or didn't have knowledge of it, that they pass the survey along to someone else that may be in the department that could answer it. So we were surveying heads, chairs, but also senior personnel that with knowledge of name changes. And just to give a kind of quick look at the slate of questions we asked, it wasn't a very large survey. Basically, we didn't want to take up too much time. We wanted response rates. So we asked current name, prior name, year of the change, reasons, and we gave some options. And then importantly, we asked how the change had impacted their department, and then also impacted how they thought it had impacted geography as a discipline. And then we asked a few questions about types of degrees, new degrees, and the number of full-time faculty. And so we received responses out of those 89 from 47, which isn't a huge number, but it was a pretty decent survey response rate of 53%. So we were pretty happy with that. And I'm just going to run through some of the results that we found. So the first thing we looked at was the year of the name change, and the study was completed in the 2014-15 time span. So that 2010s data there wasn't even 40% complete, and you can already see that there was a twofold increase over the prior 2 decades in terms of the number of departments undergoing name changes. So kind of what we thought was happening was supported by the numbers, and it'd be really interesting to run this kind of now and see what happened over the rest of the 2010s. I imagine that number continued to skyrocket. So the second thing we looked at were those name change trajectories. So we were able to do this for all 89 departments, not just the 47 who responded to the survey. And on the left here, these are departments that had geography as their name. So they were Department of Geography. There were 51 of those out of the 89. And the thickness of the arrow indicates how many took each trajectory. So 19 of those 51 actually dropped the word geography. So they were standalone geography department with only geography in the name, and they dropped that in favor of something else, usually earth science or sustainability or something like that. You can see here changed to add some sort of STEM. I'm at a School of Geographical Sciences and Urban Planning, so we definitely changed from geography to emphasize the science. There were some mergers, and then importantly, these tan circles down here show departments that added something. So geography and environment, geography and GIS or GI science, geography and urban planning, so on and so forth. So that kind of encapsulates the changes we saw to geography programs. And then over here on the right are things that started with another name, and the trends are pretty similar. There's fewer of these changes, but overall we see kind of similar trends in terms of what's being dropped and added and mergers that were happening. So we then kind of had, by this point, had received our responses back from our survey, and we had asked what the reason for the name changes were, and then we gave these answers as prompts, and then we also allowed people to specify another reason at the bottom. The other reason was by far the biggest, and so you could say we kind of missed the mark in terms of what we thought reasons for the name change would be. But you can see here that a lot was to attract undergraduate majors and to enhance standing on campus. In some of the other categories, so when people chose that other option, we also asked them to give us a little bit of information on why. And just a few of those. So budgetary reasons came up a bunch. So answers like it was cost saving to combine our department with another department and save on administration costs and things like that. Another common answer was an administrative reason. So we got answers like it was the dean's decision, or there was a reorganization of the structure of the whole college, or something like it was at the request of the administration to get us more faculty lines, things like that. The third trend here we saw was reflective of a changing field. So several respondents let us know that they were changing the name to align with what they saw happening in the discipline and what was happening in the field in general, maybe that shift to GIS and more aligning with STEM and things like that. And then lastly, and I don't think we were expecting this, but the largest by far was reflective of a changing department. So we received many responses that indicated that the prompt to change the name was happening within the department to more accurately reflect the courses that were being offered, the program goals, the faculty that were presently on staff there, and just to kind of reflect the changing times that were happening in the department. So those were some of the reasons. And then we asked people to indicate, we gave a bunch of categories here in the categories on the left there. And then we asked them to rate how these either positively or negatively impacted their department and impacted geography. So the lighter shades are their department, the darker shades are the discipline of geography. And you can see a few of these really stand out. So there's some really long dark green lines on new faculty positions, recruitment of new faculty, graduate student recruiting, prestige on campus and prestige off campus. Those really, like across the board, we heard positive impacts to geography in those categories based on the name change. There wasn't really, a lot of people either said it was too soon in their naming to really assess some of these, or really hadn't seen any negative effects of their naming yet. Although there was a bit of thought that undergraduate student recruiting was negatively impacted in terms of geography. And that could have been based on the trends that we saw that many places were dropping the word geography altogether. So the last thing we asked was about new degree programs that were offered in the bachelor's, master's, and PhD space. And again, the trend here we see mirrors the naming in that a lot of environmental degrees, physical geography degrees like earth science or climate change or things like that were being added at the BA, BS level, but also new degrees at the graduate level too. So we did see new programs occurring concurrently with those name changes. And then I just want to end here with this word cloud that we created to go along with our study, and we included it in the paper, and reviewer number 2 asked us to remove it. But I think it's pretty compelling just in terms of what was happening with the department names at the time. So pre-2000, you can see it's dominated by geography, and other words feature very very small. They're very small there. And then by 2014, which was the last year in our study, we can see that there's starting to be a more even distribution of those other names. So geography is still most prominent, but we see environmental, geosciences, earth science, things like that featuring. So with that, I am going to pass the buck over to Justin, and let me make him the presenter. All right, I passed the baton, Justin. I think you might be muted.
Thank you, Amy. Yep, I was. It's only been a year and a half. All right. All right, so hopefully everyone sees my cover slide.
Looks
Yes,
good.
we can see it.
Okay, excellent. Well, I'm going to present some of the highlights from a study that Deanna and I led at the University of Miami a few years ago. That really is the continuation of the work that Amy and Tom had done just a few years earlier. And we are but two of a team of 8 across 4 institutions: the University of Miami, San Diego State University, Coastal Carolina University, and Michigan State University, who work together on this. And again, you all know, you're here because you know the background. You know, we've had an identity crisis for quite a long time. If you really want to convince yourself how bad it is, there's a whole bunch of commentaries from 1959 and 1960 in the PG discussing the very same issues that we all still talk about today, which kind of blew my mind to dig that stuff up. So again, this work was the natural continuation of the trends that Amy and Tom saw in their research just 5 or 6 years ago. And that continued to be the topic of conversation with Kate Swanson and some colleagues in 2017, doing some qualitative research about perceptions of geography among graduate students at SDSU. And then the 2018 AAG Chairs Symposium, led by Ken Foote, focused on many of these issues surrounding marketing and branding. And it was really at that symposium when, with Amy and Tom's study kind of in the rearview mirror, I thought, what do students think about all these things? And we were wrestling with all of these issues at the University of Miami. And in fact, we voted for multiple department name changes, but never implemented any of them because we didn't have an evidence base. And so that's what our study became all about. So we asked pretty simple research questions, given all the changes to department names over the last couple of decades, and given from what you just saw from Amy's slides, how many of those were driven by administrative or subdisciplinary drivers rather than pedagogical or recruiting drivers. You know, we wanted to ask, what do undergraduate students think of all the words that we commonly use the way we present ourselves? And we measured their perceptions both of geography course titles, the types of keywords that appear in our introductory geography courses and so forth, and also what we call department primitives, the building blocks of our department and program names that, again, as you just saw, have become increasingly diverse over the last couple of decades. And again, in the full paper that it came out in the annals of the AAG just last year, we break this out in all kinds of tables across all kinds of student characteristics and so forth. But I'm just going to kind of show you the highlights. Our survey methods were really, really simple. We did this as a mobile Qualtrics survey. It was just 12 questions completed in about 5 minutes for most students. We did this with very simple rules of thumb. We approached students as opposed to trying to get them to come to us. We targeted individual classes, which allowed us to get specific student fill our quotas for different student demographics that we're pursuing in order to try to get representative samples from all 4 institutions. And we gave out food, of course, and that it made this really easy to do. We kind of stumbled through it at the University of Miami, but by the time we finished doing this work at the other 3 institutions, we were a lean, mean surveying machine. So, and then of course the pandemic came and we had to stop, but that's another story. So this is what it looked like. On the left-hand side is what the view looked like, taking it on a tablet or a laptop. On the right-hand side, obviously, I'm doing it on your phone. You can see that for each of the terms that we asked students to rate, it was the 6-point scale from extremely unattractive to extremely attractive, which yielded scores from 1 to 6. And so keep in mind, 3.5 is kind of the midpoint on the scale. Above 3.5 designates or represents a net attractive score, and below 3.5, a net unattractive score. So this is the first list of terms that we tested, the course keywords. And again, these are the types of courses that students are likely to encounter in those introductory geography courses. I'll give you a few seconds just to absorb that. And then this is the second list of what we call department primitives, again, the building blocks of department names. We were not interested in departments that were compound disciplines. So if there were lots of departments of geography and anthropology, for example, we weren't interested in testing that because basically anthropology is its own discipline. But we were interested in all the new varieties of geography that have arisen over the last couple of decades. So to jump right in, here are the top 10 and the bottom 10 ratings from our course keywords, and I hope it jumps out right away that words in the top 10, much simpler, more closer to lay speak than the more technical types of terms we see in the bottom 10. And some of these analytics, big data, these are things that are driving the world, right? That are super hot trending topics on research universities, but not things that 18, 19, 20-year-olds necessarily were that into, as you can see from the scores. This is what the full results look like, and similar to the tables you see in the journal article. And you're not meant to read all of this, but just note what's highlighted there as we go from across the 4 institutions in the first 4 columns, and then the aggregate totals on the right-hand most column. Terms that had that geo prefix tended to sink to the bottom of the rankings. But interestingly, the word geography, the word that many departments have been running from for the last 20 years, performed the best, had the most attractive scores of all the terms with the geo prefix. Here's the top 10 and bottom 10 from our department primitives list. And again, note the simple types of terms in the top 10, and the more technical, analytical sounding terms, the more sciencey types of terms that we see in the bottom 10. And presenting to a GI science audience, I know that some of this is very disappointing, but we're going to talk about this. We're going to work this through, work through this. Okay. And there's some even more interesting trends when we look at the full data table of the department primitives. We see some trends. For example, there are a whole bunch of primitives that contain the word urban, and you can see those ratings kind of run through the middling portion of the rankings. If we look at sustainability or sustainable, those tend to go, they float to the top. Environment or environmental tends to float to the top. Geo tends to, again, sink to the bottom, but again, with geography generally outperforming all the other incarnations of geo, fill in the blank. And what was even more interesting and really more distressing was that phrases that incorporated what we call the sciencing of geography, trying to work that word sciences into the name, generally fell to the bottom of the rankings as well, except when preceded by environmental and sustainability, which I think we all understand is super trending across the nation, across higher education right now. So we intended to do focus groups and dig into this deeper. We ran out of time and money, but we did do an exercise where we showed some students the lists of terms and asked them to check the ones they like, put an X next to the ones they didn't like, just to make sure they were representative of the overall aggregate trends. And then we asked students to take all of those terms and compile what they thought was the best sounding course title or most interesting type of thing they could study. And we had this one student that put together spatial planning technology. And it literally melted my mind when I then probed further, and she basically described GIS, but had no idea that this was something that you could actually study in college or even major in. So, this was just one student, but really an anecdote that just has a lot of power in terms of what we're facing in terms of the language we use to communicate about ourselves. So, in summary, we did not see differences across the 4 institutions, 3 public schools and 1 private school, 4 very different regions of the lower 48 states. College kids are college kids, and that was surprising in and of itself, but it gives us some optimism in terms of how we brand across the country. We did see that geography language was very much outcompeted, and the sciencing of our department names maybe is not working, maybe actually doing more harm than good. There were lots of disparities in the rankings that you can dig through in all the supplementary material and tables of the article if there's something specific that you're looking for. But the silver lining here was 0.5. Geography exposure mattered. A student that had previously taken a geography course rated pretty much everything in our survey higher, and these are obviously all themes that we want young people to care about and want to pursue in their careers. So that was really encouraging. Now, given Amy and Tom's work and our work, there are still some open questions. These are the kinds of things I hope we'll get to talk about today. Have the renaming trends within geography continued? Is GI science language overly technical? Yes, it's a technical field, but looking back to the GI Science 2021 conference, you see terms like computational geometry, cyber GIS, GeoAI, and so forth. But when you look at how some of the other platforms communicate their value, like Mapbox, Tableau, Google Maps API and so forth. They're using a little bit different terminology, and there's probably something we can learn from that. And then finally, the implications for GI science programs to recruit. How can we stay ahead of the technology, continue effectively recruiting and meeting employers' needs? So I'm going to leave that slide up, but turn things back to Forrest, who I think wanted to report the results of that paper.
Yeah, thank you so much. Cool. I feel exactly like that head exploding, thinking about some of those combinations and thinking about some of those connections there. So we want to encourage everybody to ask some questions in our little question panel, and I'll read through those and we'll go through those. But as you're considering questions, we've also got some polls. So I'm going to run through these polls kind of one by one, and these polls are really just about your experiences, what you've encountered in this kind of namespace, so on and so forth. So I'm going to hit launch on our first poll here. The poll is now open. You should be able to see that poll on your polling window.
Yep, we can see it.
Beautiful. We are still in collecting responses mode. And I had planned to read the poll question just so everyone could hear it as they respond, but I cannot display the full question of the poll while people are responding. So the poll is ready for you to read and respond to, and I'll respond to I'll share those results here. As you're responding to our first poll here, please throw some questions into the question box. We will go through those, and I will ask. I am very happy to be in the position of asking these questions rather than trying to answer them, because there's some great questions coming in already. And I think lots of big questions to consider in this space. The response speed is starting to slow down in our poll. So let's say we'll take another 30 seconds or so to respond to this first poll question. We've got a couple more as well. Maybe I'll mix the poll questions up with the questions over our discussion here. I think that'd be a fun way to mix stuff up. Holding strong at 70% of responses in the poll.
That's a great response rate for us.
Yeah, we're doing great response rate wise. So yep. The number keeps coming up. So our voter turnout is increasing as we go along. I said it'd be 30 seconds, but then a bunch more people voted, so I can't stop it. I can't stop it as it's going here.
So while we're waiting, I actually have a question for Justin and Diana. In terms of the courses that students were recruited from, apologies if I missed that, but were they all in geography classes? And have you considered surveying students outside of geography classes? And I ask because I feel like we are often trying to recruit students that don't know who we are, what we do, and that we exist. So we're always trying to kind of make ourselves, I don't know, known to people that don't know what geography is. So I'd be curious if sampling students outside the discipline would change those results.
Diana, you want to take that?
Yes, I was going to say, I was going to ask you that question. Thank you, Amy, for that question. In fact, in our survey design, at least at the University of Miami for sure, we made sure to not survey any geography courses. In the invitations that the courses that we went to survey students were expressly non-geography courses. We also intercepted students on campus as they were going about their business, going from class to class, studying. We also made a couple of appearances in the residential halls. So we tried to, or rather, we did not recruit within geography courses expressly. If there was a student who had taken a geography course or happened to be a geography major, then they were in the mix. But we wanted to capture that idea of previous exposure to geography with that question, but that covered whether they had been exposed to geography not at the current time, but rather in a previous course in high school or else. Justin, I don't know if you want to add more to that.
Yeah, just I went through the methods really quickly, but our sampling frame was based on all the different schools and colleges at the university. So at each school, it was a 3, 5, or 10% representative sample of the entire student body. So you can slice and dice and look at just what business students think of these words, or just what biology students, or whatever. And we captured geography students in the course of doing that as well, of course. But yeah, it covers everybody.
Yeah, that's great. That's super helpful. Just in terms of understanding what, the beat around campus, right?
Mm-hmm. And Amy, just to add to what you were saying, you shared that your department is always trying to appeal to people who don't know what geography is and who geographers are, what geographers do, right? And the idea for the survey, the origins of this came out of that. We were trying to make ourselves more relevant on campus and being more exciting and attractive to students. So, I think most geographers or most academic geographers in the United States will say the same thing, right? We're always trying to educate people about who we are and what we do in academia and on campus. So I share your sentiments.
Yeah, most certainly. Forrest, do we have poll results or other questions from the audience?
Oh, we have lots of questions in. We have some poll results. So we've topped out at 81% voted here. So thank you all for participating. Wow. I'm going to share the results of the poll with everybody. So you can see those poll results there. I'll leave that up for a little bit here as we start going through some of the questions, and then we've got about half an hour to do a couple more polls and to keep moving here. So Amy, first question that came in was for you. Respondents in your study were current chairs. When they were asked about the impacts of name changes on the Department of Geography, how likely were their responses biased or unbiased, do you think?
That's a great question. So I think I'm probably pretty biased, and I think that was reflected in the fact that we had a fair number of respondents say we haven't seen any negative effects, and also qualifying that with it's maybe too early to see negative effects. But in a lot of cases, these are probably department-driven name changes, right? In a few cases, it was administrative driven, but we did get the sense that these were departments changing because the makeup of their department and the classes they were teaching was changing. So when you make that decision, you don't want to ever think that there's going to be negative there might be negative consequences from that. So I do think that the weightier greens on that one figure were certainly probably biased by the fact that it was internal decisions and wanting to see positive impacts from that, certainly.
Certainly makes sense for me. Thank you. Question for the group at large here. Any perception of what employers think of degree names versus the students? Science might be scary to the students, but might be helpful in getting a job, for example. Any sense or any connections to what employers might be thinking?
I can start that off, Forrest.
Go for it.
All right. I think my perception is that employers are primarily looking for skills rather than degree names. Increasingly, and there's another study there, but looking at job descriptions, in advertising across the various websites that advertise positions in our disciplines for students who are graduates of our departments. They're looking for skills. They're looking for skill sets, and increasingly certifications. So my sense is that names it's certainly names of departments don't matter as much as names of degrees do, and perhaps both of those matter even less than the skills and the skill sets that students can demonstrate. That's been my experience.
Any other thoughts?
Yeah, I know for us and students who, are looking to get jobs at NASA and struggling when they have a degree that says geography, because certain agencies won't accept that as a STEM degree. So that certainly motivated us. We also have seen it, this is more at the graduate level, so not jobs after graduate school, where, if you have a STEM designated PhD, you have a longer term under which you can stay in the US under your visa to get employment. And so it's much easier to have a STEM designated degree in a department that has a STEM-ish name like science in it. So I think that certainly has motivated some changes I've seen just on those ends.
And we've seen the same trends. There have been certain fellowship programs from federal governments abroad that only fund STEM degrees. And so that's kind of created more of that pressure to be able to offer that.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, there's a great question in the chat about some of the international connections here, but I want to start the next poll and make sure that we get to that. So I'm going to launch this next poll now while I move into that question. So that poll is open now, so you can respond and answer in that poll there. But one of the questions that did come in was whether or not you had a sense if these findings are applicable in just the US context, or if they're applicable in other countries, other educational contexts, so on and so on.
Yeah, I think that's an interesting question. So we included all departments of geography in North America in our study, in our survey, but we didn't collect identifying information. So for IRB purposes, so we didn't actually ask people, what school are you at? And is this school in the US or is it in Canada? So we can't disaggregate our results in a way to kind of understand the nuances between the two different countries. But we do obviously see differences in terminology, right? So geomatics is not something that we have here in the US in terms of courses or department names, but it's very common outside the US. So I think that there's probably value in looking at these things, in countries or different, regions of the world on their own.
And I can add to that, from our study, one of the student characteristics that we captured was whether students went to a US or non-US high school. And we did see that those that did not go to a US high school, those that were educated elsewhere, tended to have much higher ratings overall of most of the terms, particularly the more STEM-oriented ones that it seems like a lot of American students are kind of a little bit intimidated by. So I think you would see quite different trends in other countries, particularly places where geography still maintains a strong place in the K through 12 curriculum.
Yeah, it would be great. I think 36% of the respondents had a name change in the past 5 years, if I'm remembering the last poll correctly. It'd be great to hear from some of those folks, especially if you're outside the U.S. Or inside the U.S. I think we can unmute your mic if I'm correct in that for us, so that our attendees can comment live. Is that true?
Yeah, if someone has a comment relative to the kind of things that we're discussing, feel free to raise your hand. I believe I can unmute you. It will be a little bit of an adventure making sure I can, but I'll definitely try. as we're thinking about this question, and thank you for everyone who's responded to the poll, just about 80% again in there. But another question along this kind of line, is this disconnect due to students being, 19-year-olds being 19-year-olds, or is it the disconnect between American K-12 education and higher ed in terms of geography? It sounds like, Justin, you were able to maybe see a little bit of that, but how much of this is just lack of K-12 exposure, do we think?
Well, Deanna, do you want to speak more to that? I mean, we saw the weaker results for students that did K through 12 in the US, but
yeah.
Why don't you take
Sure, yeah, this is something that Justin mentioned just a few moments ago. The geography exposure prior to college mattered. We had a question where they went to high school, and those students who had gone to high school outside of the United States tended to look upon, or at least to demonstrate knowledge of what geography is and what geographers do. So it would be great to run a similar survey elsewhere in other countries to see how that squares with the results that we got.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm going to, we've been sitting on 80% of 80% response for a minute here. So I'm going to close this poll and show those results. More of a GI science-y question.
Yeah, this one is an interesting one. I think where I am, we see many different, we're a huge university. We see many different schools teaching some version of not GI science, but GIS. So, some specific GIS and engineering, or, for archaeology or something like that. And so we have been working very hard to make sure that we at the Geographical Sciences School are the point of contact for those, right? So we know we can't teach every class under the sun, but we want people to know that they can come to us if they have needs, or course questions or things like that, so that we kind of keep a beat on it.
Yeah, absolutely. And there's a few GIS questions in the chat as well. So good time to bring one up. Also a great question. Could you report how many people are in the webinar so we can get an idea of the poll numbers? Yes, a raw number would help with percentages very, very greatly. We currently have 90 people in here. So when we're looking at numbers of 56%, then, somewhere in the range of 50. That's too much math for me off the top of my head, but certainly a lot of components here. One of the questions in this GIS space, what role, and we mentioned Google and Mapbox, what role do you think tech companies or geospatial platforms play in influencing the naming and branding of geography?
I can take that. I think this is something that Justin and I discussed over email over the last couple of days as we were preparing for the webinar today. And I think it depends on which company, but in just anecdotally in looking at the branding and the emails that they send out, with customer engagement and so on and so forth, it seems to tend towards the simple, right? The simpler, the better. Describe it in the most simple term that is understandable to the most people, right? So, for example, instead of spatial analysis, there is a trend, especially with companies like that, to say location analytics. So that's a trend that I've noticed. I don't know, Amy, Justin, what's your take on that?
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. And one thing we don't do that well in academia always is go and talk to people outside of academia to understand what might be resonating there. So yeah, you just said location analytics, and I was like, oh yeah, that makes a lot more sense. Like, it's super clear what that is. So I think we can do a better job of that.
Yeah,
or spatial planning technology, Justin, one of the students.
Yeah, I mean, if you look at the websites of Scribble Maps or Mapbox, you don't see a lot of heavy geography language and so forth. I mean, some of these like Maptitude and QGIS, you know, they brand themselves as geographic information systems, and it's a little bit of a different approach. But the bigger ones that are being taught on our campus, like Mapbox and so forth, they're not invoking, you know, geographic kinds of language. They're not saying things like wayfinding. They're saying routing or navigating. Or they're trying to use words that are more accessible to people and keep low barriers. So, you know, there's a lesson there, but again, we can't dumb it down to the point where, right, it looks like what we're teaching in geography departments is, you know, equivalent to what you can get in a YouTube degree. So it's finding that delicate balance. That's the tricky part. But these results about competition over in the GI science space is it's what we see at the University of Miami. I mean, we're a small geography department of, I think, eight tenure track lines, but there's GI science happening in our Institute for Data Science and Computing. There's GIS being taught in our School of Architecture, in our Marine Sciences School, and so it takes a lot of work just to stay on top of what everybody's doing and be able to connect the curricula in ways that students can go back and forth between schools and colleges, not just departments. So.
Yeah, we actually added a course here a couple years ago, and we called it GIS for non-majors. Like, that's its name in the book. And it's really popular. It keeps growing and growing. And it was in an effort to not scare folks away from taking a GIS class thinking that it was going to be this highly technical thing, to make it accessible. And then it also gives us a way to kind of capture when schools or departments come to us and say, you know, can you teach a class on this? And we can say, oh, we have this GIS for non-majors class. Like, let's start there and then see what else is needed. So yeah, it's been it was a good move for us.
That's a course that's very similar to a course that Justin and I co-designed and co-taught a few years ago called Digital Earth, which was essentially that. Yeah, you know, geography with in a little bit of GIS for non-majors, and it was imagined as a recruiting tool, you know, to introduce students to geography and to GIS and to get them excited about potentially majoring or getting a certificate or minoring in one of our programs. And just to pick up, Amy, on something that you said, this was also on one of our slides towards the end of the presentation, in terms of academia speaking to the employers, right? Who are the students going to find a job with eventually, right? I think we could all do a better job of, and many of us are doing this, are having these conversations, but doing a more systematic approach of engaging with, whether it's via internships, via formal internship agreements that the departments have and the schools have, or maybe the programs themselves, right? One thing that I know has worked for some of my colleagues is having an advisory board, you know, that is staffed by alumni and others in the geospatial world around the university to continue that conversation going, right? So the cross-pollination from academe to the private and public sector, or to employment, and vice versa. So I'll leave it at that because I know we have other questions.
We've got one more poll too, so I'm going to launch this last poll and kind of draw this. There's a couple of questions along this kind of line of professionalization, kind of education futures. And we had a couple of people ask about graduate education, and so I wanted to kind of roll those into maybe one big question, since there were many different smaller questions. So do you think that graduate students are looking at the more traditional terms versus the undergraduates? Or, you know, how do people navigate and find these kind of education opportunities that fit the intersection of their disciplinary interests, geography, urban planning, so on and so forth? What does this mean at the graduate level for research or for education?
Don't mind jumping in. I would say our survey results show that this is much less of a problem. And the evidence for that is that we looked across the 4 typical years of undergraduate study. And you see, for the most part, most terms, you see this steady increase in the ratings, in the attractiveness of things, because, and just, very logical, as students are progressing through their undergraduate studies, they're being exposed to more and more things. They're seeing interconnections between disciplines, and all of their scores, generally speaking, with an occasional exception, tend to go up. And so a student graduating who's interested in these fields of urban analytics or environmental sustainability or anything geography related, they kind of know what they're looking for, because they've probably taken a class or two in that, and that barrier's already been lowered. So I think where most of the implications of our study lie in terms of the jargon and so forth is among high school students coming into the university who aren't familiar with this language that we're using, and to the rest of the public with whom we're constantly trying to reinforce our value proposition and increase funding for the types of programs that we're involved in, and so forth.
Yeah, I think I would agree with that. What we're seeing, kind of to build on a comment I made earlier, is just the desire for our international students in particular to have the STEM degree. So some sort of GI science PhD as opposed to a geography PhD, just so that it can be STEM designated, so that they have additional time here. Yeah, that's the kind of main trend that we have seen.
Thanks to everybody who is sending in the poll responses. There are a few comments in here that I just wanted to share with everybody that I think are interesting kind of data points along with this. One person comments, as a student who did not know what GIS was, I did not have a particular interest in geography. I came from a field outside of the geosciences and didn't know what geosciences did. I wanted to learn how to analyze data. I didn't know what terminology to use or search. Geography didn't have any interest to me. I was lucky and had a professor who introduced me to GIS, and from there I searched and applied for GIS master's programs. I think that's a very common story among students in our courses who kind of discover GIS, or they have a different conception of it in their mind. Another person puts in here, many GIS employers are increasingly looking for skills in data science, software development, or programming. And there's wonders what are we doing to recruit and bring people from those spaces into our discipline. Would be interesting to sample geospatial technology workers and employers. A hunch that the ratings would be inversed, emphasizing science-heavy keywords. That's always been something I've been really curious about, is what is a GIS job these days, and what are the terms and pieces of a job ad or job responsibilities. Been trying to work on figuring that out over many years here. Looks like we're at 75%. We have been for a while in our poll, so I'm going to close the poll, give you those last set of results there. While we think about these kind of final questions in here, this is a good one to kind of start off here. How would you move forward with names of departments and programs to tie into the job market? GIS is very popular.
Yeah, it's a tough question, right? And we are a lot of times trying to serve many different masters, and I think that this really came out in the last question, because when I look at the word clouds that are in Justin and Diana's paper, the students want things like music, art, sport, fun, right? So those are the words that featured really prominently in when they surveyed the students. But on the job side, right? So for majors and students that want to go into a GIS related field, it's going to be very different, right? It's data analytics and programming and things like that. And so it's you walk this tight rope, this narrow tightrope in geography of serving your majors and doing what's best for them, and also making sure that you're a viable department on campus and are attracting students to take your classes, right? And I think that sometimes we yeah, it gets difficult to do that. Here at Arizona State, we have a class that's called, I think it's the geography of film. So when I saw kind of the music and art themes popping up, it immediately reminded me of that class that brings in, it has hundreds of students in the enrollment. So it's like, it's a huge class for us. But like our majors aren't getting jobs in film and art and things like that. So we then aren't going to rename our department based on, the types of classes that the students want to teach. So I think that, we have to balance this in terms of like, what do we do that lets other students on campus know that we're here and what we do, and that we are, open for business and here for them, while also making sure that we are serving the current majors, as they go out into the world and look for jobs.
Yeah, I call those gimmick classes, and we all know them, right? The geography of beer and geography of surfing, things like that. And we introduced one also. In fact, I'm the guilty party. But we've tried to get around this by focusing on the applications and showing imagery in all of our branding and our web presence and so forth, of show them the environment, show them global health, show them urbanization, show them the things that they understand, that they know are pressing problems and so forth, and then just and then reel them in with the methods that GIS and these other tools are the ways that we understand the world. But Deanna, you're in a GIS center, right, where you don't have, right, a steady stream of majors. It's a little bit different. Tell us about what that's like.
Also, I was gonna comment a little bit, make an observation based on what we've been talking about, and obviously based on the study that we conducted, based on our study. But it seems to me one way that we could go about, that departments of geography could go about, attracting students, but still giving them the rigor and the skills that they need to succeed, in the world, is to have a simple name, but then to have a sub-name or some kind of a tagline that describes what it is exactly that the department does, right? So for example, Department of Place or something like that. Everybody knows what place means, right? And that place speaks to both the geography, just a suggestion, but something like that could, be like a super simple name that is exciting, that almost sounds poetic, but that has the rigor of all these methods behind. But to answer Justin's question, I'm at a GIS center, which is a central location for all things GIS on Florida International University on campus. And our function is slightly different in that we serve the entire student body, so we're seeing these trends firsthand in a way, that people are getting interested in GIS and location analytics and spatial planning technology, whatever they may be calling it. And oftentimes they come through us because they're looking for resources, they're looking for training, and we then steer them to the departments that offer the degrees, that offer the programs. We steer them into other training that we provide or that we contract others to provide for us. So what I can tell you from where I sit is that interest in GIS is growing, and it's going to continue growing, but it's not only GIS. The interest in GIS applications for specific sectors, for specific industries, for specific disciplines is growing even more than just interest in GIS, right? So it's not just about the tools, it's about the theory and the concepts, and it's also about applying it for a specific sector, So Forrest, I think it was you who mentioned interest in the connections between data science and GI science, and I think we could talk for another hour about that, but that's an important component to develop for the departments to put a focus on, because that's only going to continue developing spatial humanities and so on and so forth. So, but I'll stop there because we're running out of time in case anyone else wants to say a couple of words. So simple while also rigorous, right? That seems like an oxymoron, but I think that's the balance, the tightrope balance that my co-panelists and our chair, we've all been hinting at.
I think that's a great last piece of advice here. And there's 20 more questions in the list here that we could probably each talk about every one of them for an hour for. So thanks to everyone who contributed questions, even if we didn't get to them. Your comments and your thoughts are very much appreciated, and things that we will continue to think about and discuss and work towards understanding more about these futures of GIS and futures of geography, and what the best path ahead is for all of our intersecting disciplines and domains and all the great diversity of people in science and scholarship that we are up to these days. This webinar will be available on the UCGIS website as a recording soon after it finishes processing. Thank you very much to the wonderful panelists. This was a ton of fun, and I had a great time hosting. And I learned where some buttons are in GoToWebinar, so I'm just feeling like it's a great day overall. Please stay in touch. Plenty of more webinars coming around with UCGIS, and we look forward to the next opportunity for all of us to connect. But until then, have a great rest of your day wherever you are, and we'll see you next time.
Thank you, Forrest.
Thank you, Forrest. Thank you, everyone.